Joanna, sweetie, when are you going to find yourself a good man? I nearly choked on my coffee, caught off guard by Mom's sudden question. We were sitting in her cozy kitchen, sunlight streaming through the lace curtains she'd hung years ago. It was our weekly Sunday brunch tradition we'd kept since Dad passed away 5 years ago. Mom, please. Please, I sighed, setting down my mug. We've been through this. I'm happy with my life as it is. She reached across the table, patting my hand. I know, honey, but I worry about you. You work so hard, always taking care of everyone else. Don't you want someone to take care of you? I forced a smile, trying to hide my frustration. I can take care of myself just fine, Mom. Besides, I have you. That's sweet, dear, but I won't be around forever. Her words sent a chill down my spine. I just want to know you'll be settled before, well, you know. Mom, don't talk like that, I said, my voice sharper than I intended. You're healthy as a horse. You'll outlive us all. She chuckled, but there was a sadness in her eyes that made my heart ache. Oh, Joanna, always the optimist. But life has a way of surprising us, doesn't it? I couldn't argue with that. Life had certainly thrown us some curveballs over the years. Still, I wasn't about to let her dwell on morbid thoughts. Tell you what, I said, pulling out my phone. If it'll make you feel better, I'll sign up for one of those dating apps right now. Her face lit up like a Christmas tree. Oh, would you? That would be wonderful. I rolled my eyes, but couldn't help smiling at her enthusiasm. All right, but don't get your hopes up. These things are usually full of creeps and weirdos. As I started filling out my profile, Mom peered over my shoulder. Oh, put that you like cooking and gardening. Men love a woman who can keep a nice home. Mom, I groaned. It's not 1950. I'm not looking for a husband to cook and clean for. She waved her hand dismissively. Times may change, but a man's stomach is still the way to his heart. Trust me on this. Just then, my phone buzzed with a text from work. Sorry, Mom, I've got to run. Emergency at the office. She frowned, concern etched on her face. On a Sunday? Joanna, you work too hard. This is exactly why you need someone in your life. I kissed her cheek, grabbing my purse. I promise I'll finish setting up that dating profile later. Love you, Mom. As I hurried out to my car, I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling her words had stirred up. Was she right? Was I missing out on something by focusing so much on my career and taking care of her? I shook my head, pushing the thoughts aside as I started the engine. There was no time for self-doubt now. I had a crisis to manage at work. Little did I know, as I pulled out of Mom's driveway, that this conversation would be the catalyst for a series of events that would change my life forever. The simple act of creating that dating profile would set in motion a chain reaction of love, betrayal, and ultimately, redemption. But for now, all I could think about was getting to the office and putting out whatever fire had erupted on my day off. As I merged onto the highway, my phone buzzed again. Glancing at the screen, I saw a notification from the dating app. You have a new match! I couldn't help but laugh. Mom would be thrilled. Maybe, just maybe, this wouldn't be such a bad idea after all. If only I had known then what I know now. But isn't that always the way? We make choices, thinking we're in control, never realizing how those small decisions can snowball into life-altering moments. As I pulled into the office parking lot, I took a deep breath, steeling myself for whatever chaos awaited me inside. Little did I know, the real chaos was yet to come, and it would start with a simple swipe right on a dating app. I never expected a simple swipe right to change my life so dramatically. But there I was, 6 months after that fateful Sunday brunch with Mom, sitting across from Ethan in a cozy Italian restaurant, my heart fluttering like a teenager's. So tell me more about your work in healthcare, I said, twirling pasta around my fork. Ethan's eyes lit up. It's fascinating, really. We're developing new systems to streamline patient care. I'm actually up for a big promotion next month. I couldn't help but be impressed. Here was a man with ambition, drive, and a genuine passion for helping others. It was refreshing after the string of duds I'd encountered on the dating app. That's wonderful, I smiled. I'm sure you'll get it. He reached across the table, taking my hand. Thanks, Joanna. You know, I've never met anyone quite like you. Your dedication to your mother, your work ethic, it's inspiring. I felt a warmth spread through my chest. Was this what Mom had been talking about? The feeling of being truly seen and appreciated? As we left the restaurant, Ethan surprised me with a gentle kiss. "I'd like to see you again?" he said softly. "I'd like that too," I replied, my cheeks flushing. The next few months were a whirlwind. Ethan and I saw each other every chance we got. He was attentive, charming, and seemed to genuinely care about my life and my relationship with Mom. One evening, as we walked through the park near Mom's house, Ethan suddenly stopped and turned to face me. "Joanna," he said, his voice serious, "I know this might seem fast, but I've never been more certain of anything in my life." He dropped to one knee, pulling out a small velvet box. "Will you marry me?" I gasped, tears springing to my eyes. "Ethan, Yes! Yes, of course!" As he slipped the ring on my finger, I couldn't help but think of Mom. She was going to be over the moon, and she was. When we told her the news, she practically danced around the kitchen. "Oh, Joanna, I'm so happy for you, sweetheart. Ethan, welcome to the family." Ethan hugged her warmly. "Thank you, Emily. I promise to take good care of your daughter." Mom's eyes misted over. "I know you will. You're a good man, Ethan." The wedding planning flew by in a blur of cake tastings, dress fittings, and venue tours. Before I knew it, I was standing at the altar saying, "I do," to the man of my dreams. As we danced at the reception, I caught sight of Mom watching us, a proud smile on her face. I felt a pang of sadness, knowing I'd be moving out of her house and starting my new life with Ethan. "Don't worry," Ethan whispered, as if reading my thoughts. "We'll visit your mom all the time. She's family now, too." I hugged him tighter, grateful for his understanding. The next morning, as we packed up my things from Mom's house, I couldn't shake a nagging feeling of unease. Was I really ready for this big change? Mom must have sensed my hesitation. She pulled me aside while Ethan was loading the car. "Joanna, sweetie, are you okay?" I forced a smile. "Of course, Mom. Just a little overwhelmed, I guess." She cupped my face in her hands. "Marriage isn't always easy, honey. There will be ups and downs, but if you love each other and work at it, you'll be just fine." I nodded, trying to push down the doubt creeping into my mind. This was what I wanted, wasn't it? A loving husband, a new life, a chance at happiness. As we drove away from Mom's house, Ethan reached over and squeezed my hand. "Ready for our new adventure?" I smiled back at him, pushing my worries aside. Ready as I'll ever be. Little did I know, the real adventure and the real challenges were just beginning. As we pulled onto the highway towards our new home, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was leaving more than just my old life behind. I was stepping into an unknown future, one that would test me in ways I never imagined. The honeymoon phase of our marriage faded faster than I ever imagined. 6 months in, and I found myself staring at a sink full of dirty dishes, wondering where it all went wrong. "Ethan," I called out, my voice echoing through our spacious new home. "Could you give me a hand with these dishes?" His reply came from the living room, barely audible over the sound of the TV. "Sorry, honey. I've got a big presentation tomorrow. Can't you handle it?" I bit back a sigh, reminding myself of his recent promotion. He was under a lot of pressure, after all. "Sure," I replied, forcing cheerfulness into my voice. "No problem." As I scrubbed at a particularly stubborn pot, I couldn't help but think of Mom. She'd always said marriage was about teamwork, but lately it felt like I was playing for both sides. The next morning, I woke to find Ethan already gone. A hastily scribbled note on the kitchen counter read, "Early meeting. Don't wait up tonight." I frowned, realizing this was the 3rd time this week he'd be working late. Pushing down my disappointment, I headed to work, determined to stay positive. At the office, my coworker Charlie greeted me with a warm smile. "Morning, Joanna. How's married life treating you?" I plastered on a smile. "Oh, you know, busy. Ethan's got a lot on his plate with the new position." Charlie's brow furrowed slightly. "And how about you? Are you doing okay?" His concern caught me off guard. When was the last time someone had asked me that? "I'm fine," I said, perhaps a bit too quickly, just adjusting to the new routine. As the day wore on, I found myself thinking about Charlie's question. Was I okay? The nagging doubt I'd felt on my wedding day seemed to be growing, despite my best efforts to ignore it. That evening, I decided to surprise Ethan at his office. Maybe a nice dinner out would help us reconnect. As I approached his building, I saw him exiting with a group of colleagues, laughing and relaxed in a way I hadn't seen in weeks. "Ethan," I called out, waving. His head snapped up, surprise and something else. Was it annoyance? Flashing across his face. Joanna? What are you doing here? I faltered, suddenly feeling foolish. I thought maybe we could grab dinner. He glanced at his watch, then back at his colleagues. Actually, we were just heading out to discuss the presentation. Rain check? Before I could respond, he was gone, swallowed up by the crowd of suits and briefcases. I stood there, feeling invisible and small. At home, I called Mom, desperate for her reassuring voice. "Hi, sweetie," she answered on the first ring. "How are you?" The dam broke. Through tears, I poured out my frustrations, the loneliness, the uneven distribution of household chores, the growing distance between Ethan and me. Mom listened patiently, then said, "Oh, Joanna, marriage takes work, remember? Have you talked to Ethan about how you're feeling?" I wiped my eyes, feeling a mix of shame and resolve. No, not really. I didn't want to add to his stress. "Honey," Mom's voice was gentle but firm, "your feelings matter too. You need to communicate with each other." After hanging up, I sat at the kitchen table, waiting for Ethan. It was well past midnight when I heard his key in the lock. "Ethan," I started as he stumbled in, the smell of alcohol clinging to him. "We need to talk." He waved a dismissive hand. "Not now, Joanna. I'm beat." "No," I said, surprising myself with the steel in my voice. "Now. This can't wait." Ethan's eyes narrowed, a flash of something unfamiliar, almost cruel, crossing his face. "What's your problem? I'm working my ass off to provide for us, and this is the thanks I get?" His words hit me like a physical blow. As he stormed off to the bedroom, slamming the door behind him, I sat frozen, the realization dawning on me like a cold, harsh light. This wasn't just a rough patch. This was the unraveling of everything I thought I knew about my marriage, about Ethan, about the life we were supposed to be building together. As the first rays of dawn crept through the window, I made a silent vow to myself. Things had to change. I just didn't know then how drastic that change would need to be. The shrill ring of my phone pierced the pre-dawn silence. My heart raced as I fumbled for it, instantly awake. Late-night calls never brought good news. "Joanna?" My neighbor's voice trembled. "It's your mother. The ambulance just left. You need to get to the hospital now." The world tilted on its axis. I leapt out of bed, my mind a whirlwind of panic and disbelief. "Ethan," I called out, but the other side of the bed was empty. Another late night at the office, no doubt. I drove to the hospital in a daze, praying to every deity I could think of. This couldn't be happening. Not Mom. Not now. The emergency room was a blur of harsh lights and antiseptic smells. A doctor approached, his face grave. "Mrs. Walker? I'm so sorry. We did everything we could, but your mother suffered a massive stroke. She didn't make it." The words hit me like a physical blow. I crumpled to the floor, sobs racking my body. Mom, my rock, my constant, was gone. Just like that. Hours passed in a haze of paperwork and phone calls. As morning light crept through the hospital windows, I realized Ethan still hadn't returned my frantic messages. With shaking hands, I dialed his number again. "What is it, Joanna?" His irritated voice cut through my grief. "I'm in the middle of something important." "Ethan," I choked out. "Mom's gone. She had a stroke. I need you." There was a long pause. "Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. Listen, I've got this huge presentation today. I can't get away. You understand, right?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Ethan, my mother just died. I need my husband. And I need this promotion," he snapped. "We'll talk later." The line went dead. Numbness washed over me. In my darkest hour, when I needed him most, Ethan had abandoned me. The realization was like a knife to my heart. Charlie from work arrived at the hospital an hour later, concern etched on his face. "Joanna, I'm so sorry. Is there anything I can do?" His kindness broke through my shock. I collapsed into his arms, letting out the tears I'd been holding back. Charlie held me, murmuring words of comfort, being the support I so desperately needed. The next few days passed in a blur of funeral arrangements and well-wishers. Ethan made a brief appearance at the wake, all polished smiles and hollow condolences, before rushing off again. I was too numb to even feel angry anymore. As I stood at Mom's graveside, watching her casket being lowered into the ground, a strange calm settled over me. I remembered her words from so long ago. "Life has a way of surprising us, doesn't it?" "Oh, Mom, if only you knew." Back at home, I found Ethan packing a suitcase. "Business trip," he said curtly. "I'll be gone for a week." Something inside me snapped. "A week, Ethan, we need to talk about what happened. About us." He sighed, exasperated. "What's there to talk about? Your mother died. It's sad. Life goes on. I have responsibilities, Joanna. I can't put my career on hold for your grief." His callousness stunned me into silence. As he brushed past me, heading for the door, he paused. "Oh, here," he said, fishing in his pocket. He pressed something small and cold into my palm. "Light a candle for your mom or something." I opened my hand to find a single nickel. The door slammed behind him before I could respond. Standing alone in our empty house, that pitiful nickel burning in my hand, I felt a shift deep within me. The fog of grief parted, replaced by a clarity I hadn't felt in years. This wasn't a marriage. It was a sham, a prison of my own making. Mom would be heartbroken to see me like this, wasting away in a loveless union with a man who couldn't even pretend to care about my pain. As I clutched that insulting nickel, I made a vow to myself and to Mom's memory. This ends now. I don't know how, but I'm going to find a way out. I'm going to reclaim my life, my dignity, and my future. Little did I know, the path to that future would be paved with shocking revelations and a thirst for justice I never knew I possessed. The day of Mom's funeral dawned gray and somber, a perfect reflection of my shattered heart. I stood in front of the mirror, adjusting my black dress, feeling like a hollow shell of the woman I once was. Ethan's absence loomed large, a gaping wound in my already fragile psyche. As I entered the church, a sea of sympathetic faces turned towards me. I plastered on a brave smile, accepting hugs and condolences with robotic grace. Then I saw him. Roger, Ethan's brother, making his way through the crowd. "Joanna," he said softly, enveloping me in a warm embrace. "I'm so sorry for your loss. Emily was an incredible woman." Tears pricked my eyes. "Thank you, Roger. I'm glad you could make it." He squeezed my hand. "Of course, I wouldn't miss it. I just wish." He trailed off, a strange expression crossing his face. "What is it?" I asked, suddenly alert. Roger hesitated, then pulled me aside. "Joanna, there's something you should know. Ethan, he's not at work today." My brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" He said he had an important presentation. "I ran into his boss at the coffee shop this morning," Roger explained, his voice low. "He mentioned that Ethan had taken bereavement leave for the week, said he was impressed by Ethan's dedication to family." The world tilted on its axis. That's not possible. Ethan told me he couldn't get away from work," he said. Roger's face was a mixture of anger and pity. "I'm sorry, Joanna. I thought you should know." As the funeral service began, my mind raced. Where was Ethan? Why had he lied? The questions swirled, threatening to drown out the pastor's words of comfort. After the service, as mourners filed past Mom's casket, I caught sight of a familiar face. Charlie, my coworker, stood at the back of the church, his eyes filled with concern. Our gazes locked, and in that moment, I felt a flicker of warmth in my cold, numb heart. Later at the wake, I found myself in Mom's kitchen, surrounded by well-meaning relatives and casseroles. The chatter faded to white noise as I struggled to process Roger's revelation. "Joanna?" Charlie's gentle voice cut through my thoughts. "Can I get you anything?" I looked up, meeting his kind eyes. "Actually, could you just sit with me for a moment?" He nodded, taking the seat beside me. We sat in companionable silence, a stark contrast to the constant tension I felt with Ethan. As the last of the mourners trickled out, I made a decision. I couldn't let this go. I needed answers. With shaking hands, I pulled out my phone and dialed Ethan's number. It went straight to voicemail. I tried his office next. "Hello, Joanna," his secretary answered. "I'm so sorry about your mother. How are you holding up?" "I'm managing," I replied, my voice tight. "Is Ethan there? I really need to speak with him." There was a pause. "Ethan? No, he's out on bereavement leave this week. Didn't he tell you?" The confirmation hit me like a physical blow. "Right, of course. Thank you." I ended the call, my mind reeling. The pieces were falling into place, forming a picture I didn't want to see. Charlie appeared at my side, concern etched on his face. "Joanna, what's wrong?" I looked up at him, feeling something shift inside me. The grief, the betrayal, the years of neglect, it all crystallized into a single, burning point of resolve. "Charlie," I said, my voice steadier than I felt, "I need your help. There's something I have to do." As I outlined my plan, I felt a strange mix of fear and exhilaration. This was it, the moment I'd start taking back control of my life. Whatever Ethan was hiding, wherever he was, I was going to find out. Mom's voice echoed in my head. "Life has a way of surprising us." Well, Mom, I thought grimly, it's time I did some surprising of my own. Little did I know, the surprises awaiting me would shake the very foundation of my world and set me on a path I never could have imagined. The next morning I woke with a steely determination. Roger had agreed to help me uncover the truth about Ethan, and we wasted no time. As a lawyer, Roger had connections that could prove invaluable. I've got a friend in the HR department at Ethan's company, Roger said as we sat in his office. She owes me a favor. Are you sure you want to do this, Joanna? I nodded, my jaw set. I need to know, Roger. All of it. Hours later, we sat surrounded by a mountain of documents. Financial reports, emails, meeting minutes, all painting a picture that made my stomach churn. Joanna, Roger's voice was grave. This goes beyond just lying about work. Look at these discrepancies in the financial reports. And these emails, Ethan's been manipulating data, covering up mistakes. This could be grounds for dismissal, maybe even legal action. My head spun. The Ethan I thought I knew was crumbling before my eyes, replaced by a stranger I didn't recognize. Just then my phone buzzed. A text from Charlie. Found something. Meet me at the cafe across from Ethan's office, ASAP. Go, Roger urged. I'll keep digging here. 20 minutes later I rushed into the cafe, spotting Charlie in a corner booth. His face was pale, his eyes wide. Charlie, what is it? I asked, sliding into the seat across from him. He pushed a manila envelope towards me. I followed Ethan, like you asked. Joanna, I'm so sorry, but... With trembling hands I opened the envelope. Inside were photos, Ethan entering a hotel, arm in arm with a woman I didn't recognize. The timestamp showed it was taken yesterday, during Mom's funeral. The world tilted on its axis. I felt like I was going to be sick. There's more, Charlie said softly. I overheard them talking. Ethan's been embezzling money from the company. He's planning to leave the country, Joanna. Soon. I couldn't breathe. Couldn't think. Everything I thought I knew about my life, my marriage, was a lie. My phone rang, startling us both. It was Roger. Joanna, you need to get back here now. I've found something big. The next few hours passed in a blur. Roger had uncovered a trail of fraudulent activities stretching back years. Ethan hadn't just been lying about work. He'd been systematically defrauding his company, manipulating data to cover his tracks. We need to report this, Roger said, his face grim. Joanna, I know he's my brother, but what he's done, it's criminal. I nodded, numb. Do it. As Roger made the calls, I sat in stunned silence. How had I been so blind? So naive? The weight of my mother's absence hit me anew. She would have seen through Ethan's facade in an instant. Just then, my phone lit up with a text from Ethan. Working late. Don't wait up. Something inside me snapped. No more lies. No more deception. I stood abruptly. I'm going home, I announced. I'm going to pack my things and leave. I can't be there when he comes back. Charlie and Roger exchanged worried glances. You shouldn't be alone, Charlie said. Let me come with you. As we drove to my house, no, Ethan's house, I felt a strange mix of grief and liberation. The life I thought I had was gone, shattered beyond repair. But in its place, I felt the stirrings of something new, something stronger. Walking into the house, I headed straight for the bedroom. Charlie closed behind. As I pulled out a suitcase, my eyes fell on the framed photo of Ethan and me on our wedding day. With a sudden, fierce movement, I swept it off the dresser, watching it shatter on the floor. Joanna? Charlie said softly, placing a hand on my shoulder. I turned to face him, tears streaming down my cheeks. It's over, Charlie. All of it. I don't know what happens next, but I know I can't stay here another minute. As I zipped up my suitcase, I heard the front door open. Ethan's voice called out, Joanna? Are you home? My blood ran cold. This was it, the moment of truth, and I was ready for it. My heart pounded as Ethan's footsteps echoed through the house. Charlie squeezed my hand, a silent show of support. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the confrontation to come. Joanna? Ethan called again, his voice closer now. What's going on? Whose car is that outside? I stepped out of the bedroom. Charlie closed behind me. Ethan's eyes widened as he took in the scene. My packed suitcase, Charlie's presents, the shattered wedding photo on the floor. What the hell is this? He demanded, his face flushing with anger. It's over, Ethan, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. I know everything. The lies, the affair, the embezzlement, all of it. Ethan's face paled, then twisted into a sneer. You don't know anything, he spat. You're just a naive little girl playing detective. Am I? I pulled out my phone, showing him the photos Charlie had taken. How about these, or the financial records Roger uncovered? For a moment, Ethan looked genuinely shocked, then his expression hardened. So what, you think you can just walk away, after everything I've done for you? Done for me? You've done nothing but lie and cheat. You couldn't even be there for me when my mother died. Ethan's eyes darted to Charlie, then back to me. And what's this? You're leaving me for him? He took a menacing step forward. Charlie moved to stand between us. Back off, Ethan. It's over. Ethan's fist connected with Charlie's jaw before I could react. Charlie stumbled back, and I screamed as Ethan lunged for me. But Charlie was quicker. He tackled Ethan to the ground, pinning him down. Joanna, call the police, he shouted. With shaking hands, I dialed 911. As I reported the situation, I watched Ethan struggle against Charlie's hold, cursing and threatening us both. The next hour passed in a blur. The police arrived, taking statements and photographing Charlie's bruised face. Ethan was led away in handcuffs, still shouting threats and accusations. As the chaos subsided, I sank onto the couch, exhausted. Charlie sat beside me, holding an ice pack to his jaw. Are you okay? He asked softly. I nodded, tears streaming down my face. I can't believe it's really over, I whispered. Just then my phone buzzed. It was Roger. Joanna, I've got more bad news. Ethan's company just called. They're pressing charges for the embezzlement. It's bad. Really bad. I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of everything crashing down on me. When I opened them again, I saw Charlie watching me with concern. What do you need? He asked simply. In that moment, I knew what I had to do. I need to leave, I said, standing up. Not just this house, but this whole life. I can't stay here, surrounded by all these memories and lies. Charlie nodded, understanding in his eyes. Where will you go? I thought of Mom, of all the dreams and plans we'd shared. There's a little town on the coast Mom always talked about retiring to. I think I'll start there. As I packed the last of my belongings, my eyes fell on the nickel Ethan had given me to light a candle for Mom. With a sudden, fierce movement, I snatched it up and shoved it in my pocket. Charlie helped me load my car, then hesitated. Joanna, I care about you. A lot, but I understand if you need space. I looked at him, really looked at him, for what felt like the first time. Come with me, I said impulsively. Just for a while. I could use a friend. As we drove away from the house that had once been my home, I felt a mix of terror and exhilaration. Everything I'd known was gone, shattered like that wedding photo on the bedroom floor. But as I glanced at Charlie, saw the open road ahead of us, I felt something else too. Hope. The nickel weighed heavy in my pocket, a reminder of all I'd lost, but also a promise of what was to come. Whatever happened next, I knew one thing for certain. I was done being the naive, trusting Joanna. It was time to forge a new path on my own terms. As we crossed the city limits, I took a deep breath. This wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. 6 months after leaving Ethan, I stood on the beach of the small coastal town Mom had always dreamed of retiring to. The salty breeze whipped through my hair as I clutched the nickel that had become a symbol of my past. My phone buzzed, a text from Roger. It's over. Ethan took a plea deal. 10 years. You won't have to testify. Relief washed over me, followed quickly by a pang of sadness. Not for Ethan, but for the life I thought I'd have. I showed the message to Charlie, who stood beside me. How do you feel? He asked, his hand finding mine. Free, I replied, surprising myself with the truth of it. Just then my phone rang. It was Ethan, calling from jail. My hand trembled as I answered. Joanna, his voice was desperate. Please, you have to help me. Tell them it was all a misunderstanding. I did it for us, for our future. I closed my eyes, remembering the lies, the betrayal, the years of manipulation. No, Ethan, I said firmly. You did it for yourself, always for yourself. Goodbye. I ended the call, feeling a weight lift from my shoulders. Charlie squeezed my hand, a silent show of support. Come on, he said softly. There's something I want to show you. We walked along the beach to a small animal shelter. Inside, a scruffy mutt with soulful eyes caught my attention. This is Chance, the shelter worker said. He's had a rough go of it, but he's got a lot of love to give. As I knelt to pet him, Chance licked my face, his tail wagging furiously. I felt something shift inside me, a spark of joy I hadn't felt since Mom died. I'll take him, I said, surprising myself. Later, as Charlie and I walked Chance along the shore, I spotted an old wishing well near the boardwalk. A memory flashed. Mom and me, years ago, tossing coins and making wishes. I pulled out the nickel, turning it over in my palm. You know, I said to Charlie, Mom always said that sometimes the best way to move forward is to let go of the past. With a deep breath, I tossed the nickel into the well. As it disappeared into the darkness, I felt a sense of closure wash over me. So, Charlie said, a hint of nervousness in his voice, what now? I looked at him, really looked at him, seeing the kindness and love that had been there all along. Now, I said, we build something new, together. As if on cue, Chance barked happily, chasing seagulls along the shore. I laughed, feeling lighter than I had in years. Over the next few months, life took on a new rhythm. I threw myself into volunteer work at the animal shelter, honoring Mom's memory by supporting the causes she loved. Charlie and I took things slow, building a relationship based on trust and mutual respect. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset, Charlie turned to me. You know, Joanna, you're not the same woman I met all those months ago. I nodded, understanding what he meant. I'm stronger now? Wiser? And happier? He asked, a hint of hope in his voice. I smiled, leaning in to kiss him softly. Happier than I've ever been. As night fell, I thought about the journey that had brought me here. The pain, the betrayal, the loss. It had all shaped me, made me who I was now. But it didn't define me anymore. I was Joanna, daughter, friend, animal lover, and now a woman ready to love again. Mom would be proud, I thought. She always said life had a way of surprising us. Looking at Charlie, at Chance curled up at our feet, at the life we were building together, I realized Mom was right. Life does surprise us. But sometimes, if we're brave enough, we can surprise ourselves even more. As the stars came out, twinkling over the ocean, I made a silent vow. To live fully, to love deeply, and to always, always trust my own strength. The road ahead might be uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, I was excited to see where it would lead. After all, this wasn't the end of my story. It was just the beginning of a whole new chapter. You think you can just waltz back into our lives with empty promises and a guilty conscience? The words spilled out of my mouth before I could stop them, my voice laced with years of pent-up resentment. I watched as my husband Declan flinched at my accusation, his carefully crafted facade cracking ever so slightly. For a moment, the man I'd once loved stood before me, exposed and vulnerable, a stark contrast to the charming, successful marketing executive he portrayed to the world. Thea, please, let me explain, he pleaded, his eyes darting around our modest suburban home, as if searching for an escape. I crossed my arms, steeling myself against the flood of emotions threatening to overwhelm me. Explain what, Declan? That you've been lying to me all this time? That you've been leading a double life? The words hung in the air, the weight of their truth bearing down on us both. I couldn't help but wonder how long this had been going on, how many times Declan had betrayed my trust. My gaze drifted to our son Finn, who stood silently by my side, his hazel eyes narrowed with a wisdom and maturity far beyond his 15 years. The pain and confusion etched on his face made my heart clench. This wasn't how it was supposed to be, our little family, torn apart by Declan's selfish actions. "Mom, what's going on?" Finn asked, his voice barely above a whisper. What is he talking about? I hesitated, not wanting to burden my son with the ugliness of his father's transgressions. But Finn deserved to know the truth, no matter how painful it might be. Your father has been... I paused, struggling to find the right words. He's been keeping secrets from us, Finn. Secrets that are going to change our lives, whether we're ready or not. Declan took a step forward, his hands raised in a placating gesture. Thea, please, let's not involve Finn in this. This is between you and me. I let out a humorless laugh. Between you and me? Don't you think Finn has a right to know what kind of man you really are? I turned to my son, placing a comforting hand on his shoulder. Finn, your father has been having an affair. He's been living a double life, betraying our family. Finn's eyes widened, his expression a mix of shock and betrayal. An affair? But how could you, Dad? He shook his head, his voice trembling with emotion. How could you do this to us? Declan opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. For once, the silver-tongued charmer was at a loss for words. I took a step closer to Finn, wrapping my arm around him protectively. I'm sorry you had to find out this way, Finn, but I promise you we're going to get through this, together. Finn nodded, his jaw set with a determination that belied his age. What are we going to do, Mom? I took a deep breath, my gaze unwavering as I stared down my husband. We're going to fight. Declan's betrayal isn't just about me. It's about our family, our future, and I won't let him destroy everything we've built without a fight. Declan opened his mouth, but I raised my hand, silencing him. Save it, Declan. The time for excuses and empty promises is over. Now it's time for you to face the consequences of your actions. The air was thick with tension as we stood there, 3 lives irrevocably changed by the unraveling of Declan's web of lies. But in that moment, I knew that Finn and I would emerge stronger, our bond forged in the crucible of adversity. This was our fight, and we were ready to win. The next few days were a blur of fury and determination. After Declan's botched attempt to smooth things over, I knew I couldn't trust him anymore. There was only one thing left to do: uncover the truth, no matter how ugly it might be. So, with Finn's help, I started digging. We followed Declan's movements, tracking his comings and goings, piecing together the fragments of his double life. It wasn't long before we stumbled upon a clue that would change everything. One evening, as Declan was leaving for another late night at the office, Finn and I decided to follow him. We trailed his car through the city streets, our hearts pounding in anticipation and dread. Finally, Declan pulled into an upscale apartment complex, one I didn't recognize. "This is it, Mom," Finn whispered, his eyes narrowed with suspicion. "Let's see what he's hiding." We waited, hidden in the shadows, as Declan let himself into the building. Minutes later, a young woman emerged, her blonde hair and designer clothes a stark contrast to the modest suburban housewife I had become. "Who is she?" Finn asked, his voice laced with anger. I shook my head, my own fury building. "I don't know, but I intend to find out." We watched as the woman entered Declan's car, and the two of them drove off together. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles turning white. Betrayal, rage, and a twinge of heartbreak swirled within me, each emotion fueling my determination to uncover the full extent of Declan's deception. "We need to get inside that apartment," I said, my gaze locked on the building. Finn nodded, already unbuckling his seatbelt. "I'm with you, Mom." We made our way to the apartment, and with a bit of lock-picking skill that Finn had picked up from a friend, we were inside. The place was immaculate, clearly maintained by someone with Declan's refined tastes. But it was the personal touches that made my blood boil. Framed photos of the woman, her belongings scattered throughout the space. "He's been living a double life," I murmured, the reality of the situation sinking in. "All this time, he's been deceiving us, betraying our family." Finn's jaw was clenched, his eyes burning with a righteous fury. "What are we going to do, Mom?" I took a deep breath, my mind racing with possibilities. "We're going to expose him, Finn. We're going to bring his whole world crashing down around him." "How?" Finn asked, his voice tinged with uncertainty. I turned to him, a grim determination etched on my face. "We're going to plant the seeds of his downfall. We're going to use his own deceit against him, and we're going to make sure he pays for what he's done." Finn nodded, his expression mirroring my own. "I'm with you, Mom. Whatever it takes." We left the apartment. The evidence of Declan's infidelity burned into our minds. The drive home was silent, the weight of our newfound knowledge heavy upon our shoulders. But I knew that this was only the beginning. Declan's betrayal would not go unanswered, and I would stop at nothing to ensure that he faced the consequences of his actions. As we pulled into our driveway, I turned to Finn, my eyes meeting his. "Get ready, Finn. The storm is coming, and we're going to be the ones to weather it." The walls of our home seemed to close in on me as Finn and I returned from our investigation. The reality of Declan's betrayal weighed heavily, a dark cloud that threatened to consume us both. Finn was the first to break the silence. "Mom, what are we going to do?" I could hear the trepidation in his voice, the fear that his family was falling apart. He was just a child, yet he was forced to grapple with the ugly truth of his father's deception. "We're going to fight back," I said, my own voice steady and resolute. "Declan needs to be held accountable for what he's done." Finn's eyes widened, a flicker of hope sparking within them. "How? What's the plan?" I paused, weighing my words carefully. "We're going to use his own lies against him. We're going to expose his affair and the embezzlement at his company. Finn's brow furrowed. Embezzlement? You think he's been stealing from his company? I nodded grimly. It's the only explanation for the lavish apartment and the way he's been living. Declan's always been good with numbers, and it wouldn't be hard for him to siphon off funds. Finn's expression shifted, the innocence of youth replaced by a steely determination. Okay, what do we do? I placed a hand on his shoulder, meeting his gaze. Finn, this isn't going to be easy. What we're about to do could have serious consequences. Are you sure you're ready for this? He didn't hesitate. I'm with you, Mom, whatever it takes. I couldn't help but feel a surge of pride at his unwavering loyalty. Declan had betrayed us, but Finn and I would stand united, no matter the cost. All right, here's what we're going to do. Over the next few days, Finn and I worked tirelessly, piecing together the evidence against Declan. We scoured his financial records, meticulously documenting the discrepancies and misappropriated funds. Alongside that, we set the stage for exposing his affair, planting breadcrumbs that would lead directly to his mistress. It was a delicate dance, one that required patience and precision. Finn proved to be an invaluable partner, his sharp mind and keen observation skills complementing my own. Together, we wove a web of deceit that would ensnare Declan, leaving him no choice but to face the consequences of his actions. As the final pieces fell into place, Finn and I stood in our living room, surveying the evidence before us. Are you sure about this, Mom? Finn asked, his eyes reflecting the weight of what we were about to do. I nodded, my resolve unwavering. Declan needs to pay for what he's done. This is the only way to ensure our family's future. Finn took a deep breath and then squared his shoulders. Okay, let's do this. With a few clicks of the mouse, the incriminating information was sent out into the world. Anonymous tips that would unleash the storm upon Declan's carefully constructed facade. In the quiet that followed, Finn and I stood together, our hands clasped tightly. We had taken the first step, and now the dominoes were set to fall. Whatever happened next, we would face it as a united front, mother and son, determined to reclaim our lives from the ashes of Declan's betrayal. The days that followed were filled with a tense anticipation, as Finn and I waited for the dominoes to fall. We knew that it was only a matter of time before Declan's world came crashing down around him, and we were both equal parts terrified and resolute. The first signs of the impending chaos came when Declan started acting strangely. He was distracted, his usual charm and confidence replaced by an underlying anxiety. I watched him, feigning ignorance as he made frantic phone calls and retreated to his study for hours on end. Something's wrong, Finn whispered one evening as we sat in the living room pretending to watch TV. Do you think he knows? I placed a comforting hand on his arm. If he does, he hasn't confronted us yet, but we need to be prepared for when he does. Finn nodded, his brow furrowed in concentration. What's the next step? I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what was to come. We need to plant the final piece of evidence, something that will irrevocably link Declan to the embezzlement and his affair. Finn's eyes widened, but he didn't flinch. What do you have in mind? I've set up a false paper trail, I explained, my voice low and steady. Documents that will implicate Declan in the embezzlement, with his mistress as the motive. Finn's expression shifted, a glimmer of unease crossing his features. Mom, are you sure about this? I mean, we're essentially framing him. I reached out and squeezed his hand, my gaze unwavering. I know, Finn, but Declan has left us no choice. He destroyed our family, and now he has to face the consequences. Finn nodded, his jaw set with determination. Okay, let's do it. Together, we carefully planted the evidence, ensuring that it would be discovered at the most opportune moment. As we finished, a sense of finality settled over us, the weight of our actions palpable. It's done, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Finn looked at me, his eyes filled with a mixture of fear and resolve. What now? I pulled him into a tight hug, my own emotions threatening to spill over. Now we wait, and when the time is right, we'll be there to watch Declan fall. The next few days were a blur of tension and anxiety. Declan's behavior grew more erratic, and I could see the strain taking its toll on him. Finn and I kept our heads down, acting as if nothing was amiss, but the anticipation was palpable. Then, the moment we had been waiting for arrived. Declan burst through the front door, his face contorted with rage and panic. "What the hell have you done?" he shouted, his eyes wild. I stood my ground, my expression calm and collected. "I have no idea what you're talking about, Declan." "Don't give me that crap, Thea," he spat, his hands trembling. "I know you're behind this. The company is investigating me, and they've found evidence of embezzlement, and—" He trailed off, the color draining from his face as he realized the full extent of his downfall. "And your affair," I finished, my voice laced with a quiet triumph. "Looks like the walls are closing in, Declan." Declan stared at me, his mouth agape, unable to form a coherent response. In that moment, I saw the man I had once loved for who he truly was, a coward, a liar, and a betrayer. Finn stepped forward, his gaze unwavering. "You brought this on yourself, Dad. Now you have to face the consequences." Declan opened his mouth, but no words came out. He turned and fled, the sound of his footsteps echoing through the house, a fitting symphony to the crumbling of his carefully constructed life. As the door slammed shut, Finn and I stood together, our eyes meeting in a silent understanding. The first phase of our plan was complete, and now the final act was about to unfold. The days that followed Declan's confrontation were charged with a tense and uneasy silence. Finn and I knew that the final act was about to unfold, and we steeled ourselves for the inevitable fallout. Declan, for his part, had become a shadow of his former self. Gone was the confident, charismatic man I had once loved. In his place was a desperate, cowering figure, constantly looking over his shoulder. I could see the fear in his eyes, the realization that his carefully constructed world was crumbling around him. One evening, as Finn and I sat in the living room, the sound of Declan's car pulling into the driveway sent a jolt of adrenaline through me. I turned to Finn, my gaze unwavering. "It's time," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Finn nodded, his expression resolute. We moved to the front window, watching as Declan hurried up the path, his movements frantic and erratic. The front door burst open, and Declan stumbled inside, his eyes wild and his face twisted with anguish. "Thea! Finn!" he cried, his voice cracking with desperation. "What have you done?" I stepped forward, my arms crossed over my chest. "What are you talking about, Declan?" "Don't play dumb with me," he shouted, spittle flying from his lips. "The company knows about the embezzlement. They know about Elise." Finn tensed beside me, his jaw clenched tight. "So your little affair has finally caught up with you, huh, Dad?" Declan's gaze snapped to our son, his eyes wild with a mixture of fear and fury. "You two? You did this, didn't you? How could you?" I held up a hand, silencing him. "We did what we had to do, Declan. You brought this on yourself." "But I'm your husband," he bellowed, his voice echoing through the house. "How could you do this to me?" "You lost the right to be our husband and father the moment you betrayed us," I said, my voice steady and unwavering. "You destroyed our family, Declan. Now you have to face the consequences." Declan's knees buckled, and he collapsed to the floor, his head cradled in his hands. "Please, Thea, Finn, you have to help me. I can't lose everything." Finn stepped forward, his expression hardening. "You should have thought about that before you started lying and cheating. Now it's too late." Declan looked up at us, his eyes pleading. "I'll do anything. Please, just help me." I shook my head, my heart hardening against the man I once loved. "It's too late for that, Declan. The die has been cast." The sound of a car pulling into the driveway made us all freeze. Declan's face paled, and he scrambled to his feet, his eyes darting around the room in a desperate search for an escape. "That's her," he whispered, his voice trembling. "Elise." I watched as the front door opened, and a young woman stepped inside, her expression a mixture of confusion and concern. "Declan, what's going on?" she asked, her gaze sweeping over the scene before her. Declan moved towards her, his hands outstretched. "Elise, you have to help me. Thea and Finn, they've—" But before he could finish, a barrage of text messages and emails began to flood Elise's phone. She looked down, her eyes widening as she read the messages, her expression shifting from confusion to fury. "Declan, what is this?" she demanded, her voice rising in pitch. "Embezzlement? Affair?" Declan's face crumpled, and he reached for her, but Elise recoiled, slapping him across the face. "You lied to me," she spat, her eyes brimming with tears. "All this time you were using me." Declan cowered, his once proud demeanor shattered. "Elise, please, I can explain. but Elise was already turning towards the door, her steps quickening with each passing moment. "It's over, Declan," she called out, her voice thick with disgust. "I want nothing to do with you." And with that, she was gone, leaving Declan alone, his world collapsing around him. Finn and I watched, our expressions stoic, as the final dominoes fell and Declan's reckoning had arrived. The fallout from Declan's downfall was swift and unforgiving. In the days following the confrontation at our home, the evidence we had so meticulously planted began to surface, sending shockwaves through his company and personal life. Finn and I watched with a mixture of triumph and unease as the revelations unfolded. Declan's embezzlement scheme had been uncovered, with a paper trail leading directly back to him. His affair with the younger colleague Elise had also been exposed. Her angry tirades and accusations splashed across social media for all to see. The company's executives were swift to act, convening an emergency board meeting to discuss the shocking allegations against their star marketing executive. Finn and I positioned ourselves strategically, ensuring we would have a front-row seat to Declan's downfall. As the meeting commenced, the tension in the room was palpable. Declan, once the picture of confidence and control, sat hunched in his chair, his eyes darting around the room in a futile search for a way out. "Mr. Langston," the CEO began, his voice grave, "we've received some disturbing information regarding your conduct at the company. Allegations of embezzlement and an inappropriate relationship with a colleague. Do you have any explanation for these serious charges?" Declan's mouth opened and closed several times, but no words came out. He was trapped, his carefully constructed facade crumbling before our very eyes. I don't know what to say," he stammered, his usual eloquence deserting him. The CEO's expression hardened. "Perhaps you'd like to explain the substantial transfers of company funds into a personal account, or the considerable sums spent on lavish gifts and trips for this colleague of yours." Declan swallowed hard, his face pale and drawn. I can explain. It's not what it seems. I was just trying to." "Save it, Declan," the CEO interrupted, his voice dripping with contempt. "The evidence against you is overwhelming. You've betrayed the trust of this company and your family. As of this moment, you are terminated from your position, and we will be pursuing legal action against you." The room erupted into a cacophony of voices, executives shouting and demanding answers, the sound of Declan's world crashing down around him. Finn gripped my hand, his eyes shining with a mixture of relief and vindication. "It's happening, Mom. He's getting what he deserves." I squeezed his hand, my own expression grim. "Yes, Finn, but this is only the beginning." As the meeting descended into chaos, I scanned the room, searching for any sign of Elise. It wasn't long before I spotted her, her face a mask of fury and betrayal. Declan caught sight of her, his eyes widening in panic. Elise, please, you have to help me. You know I love you. We can—" But Elise cut him off, slapping him hard across the face. "How dare you, Declan? You used me, lied to me, and now you expect me to help you. You're pathetic." Declan recoiled, his hand clutching his reddened cheek. "Elise, please. I can make this right. We can—" "There is no we, Declan," Elise spat, her voice trembling with emotion. "We're done. I want nothing more to do with you or your twisted little family." With that, Elise turned on her heel and stormed out of the room, leaving Declan to face the consequences of his actions alone. As the executives continued to berate and interrogate Declan, Finn and I watched in silence, our plan unfolding flawlessly. The dominoes were falling one by one, and Declan's world was crumbling around him. In that moment, I knew that our long-awaited revenge was at hand. Declan had betrayed us, and now he would pay the price. The echoes of his betrayal would reverberate through his life, a haunting reminder of the consequences of his actions. The days that followed Declan's public downfall were a whirlwind of chaos and upheaval. As the investigation into his embezzlement and affair deepened, the once respected marketing executive found himself stripped of his job, his reputation, and the life he had so carefully crafted. Finn and I watched from the sidelines, our expressions a mix of grim satisfaction and a hint of unease. We had engineered Declan's downfall, but the weight of our actions still lingered, a constant reminder of the difficult choices we had been forced to make. The news of Declan's transgressions spread like wildfire, splashed across headlines and social media. His colleagues, once admirers of his success, now turned on him with a vengeance, their disgust and outrage palpable. The company he had worked for unceremoniously severed all ties, leaving him to face the legal consequences of his actions alone. One afternoon, as Finn and I sat in our living room, the doorbell rang. I opened the door to find a distraught Elise, her eyes red and puffy from crying. "Thea, I need to talk to you," she said, her voice trembling. I hesitated, unsure of how to respond. "Elise, what are you doing here?" She pushed past me, her gaze wild and erratic. "I can't believe this is happening. Declan, he's ruined everything." Finn appeared at my side, his expression wary. "What do you want, Elise?" Elise whirled around, her eyes flashing with a mixture of anger and desperation. "I want to know why you did this. Why did you destroy Declan's life?" I held up a hand, my voice calm and measured. "Elise, Declan brought this upon himself. He betrayed our family, and we had to take action." "But I loved him," Elise cried, her hands clenching into fists. "I thought we had something real. How could he do this to me?" Finn stepped forward, his expression hardening. "Declan was using you, Elise. He's been lying and cheating his whole life. You were just one of his victims." Elise shook her head, her shoulders slumping in defeat. "I can't believe it. All this time I thought he was the one. And now?" She trailed off, a sob escaping her lips. I reached out, placing a hand on her arm. "I'm sorry, Elise. I know this is difficult, but Declan's actions have consequences. You deserve better than him." Elise looked up at me, her eyes glistening with tears. I don't know what to do. My life is in shambles because of him." Finn stepped forward, his voice soft but resolute. "You have to move on, Elise. Declan is going to face the full weight of the law for what he's done. You don't have to be a part of that." Elise nodded, her jaw clenching with determination. "You're right. I can't let him drag me down, too." She turned to the door, pausing for a moment. "Thank you, Thea. Finn, I hope you both can find a way to move on from this, too." With that, she was gone, leaving Finn and I alone once more. We stood in silence, the weight of our actions heavy on our shoulders. "Do you think she'll be okay, Mom?" Finn asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I sighed, pulling him into a tight hug. "I hope so, Finn. But right now, we need to focus on rebuilding our own lives." Finn nodded, his arms tightening around me. "What about Dad? What's going to happen to him?" I felt a twinge of regret, but it was quickly overshadowed by a steely resolve. "Declan will have to face the consequences of his actions, Finn. The authorities are already closing in on him. It's time for him to pay for what he's done." Finn's grip on me tightened, and I knew that, despite the difficulty of our situation, we would emerge stronger. Declan's betrayal had shattered our family, but Finn and I would rebuild, stronger and more resilient than ever before. In the aftermath of Declan's downfall, Finn and I found ourselves grappling with a range of emotions: relief, sadness, and a glimmer of hope for a brighter future. The dust had settled, and while the scars of his betrayal remained, we were determined to move forward and reclaim our lives. As the legal proceedings against Declan unfolded, the full extent of his misdeeds became public knowledge. The embezzlement charges were staggering, and his affair with Elise only added to the tarnish on his reputation. Declan, once a respected and influential figure, now found himself shunned by his former colleagues and facing the very real possibility of a lengthy prison sentence. Despite the gravity of the situation, Finn and I took solace in the knowledge that justice was being served. Declan would have to answer for his crimes, and we could finally begin to heal and rebuild our lives without the burden of his lies and deceit. As the weeks turned to months, I found myself reconnecting with old friends and colleagues, my dedication to my nursing career becoming a source of pride and purpose. The promotion I had been working towards for years finally materialized, and I reveled in the validation of my hard work and resilience. Finn, too, blossomed in the absence of Declan's toxic influence. He threw himself into his studies, his grades soaring as he set his sights on prestigious colleges and universities. The light in his eyes had returned, and I could see the weight of the world slowly lifting from his shoulders. One evening, as Finn and I sat in our living room enjoying a rare moment of peace, the doorbell rang. I tensed, half expecting to see Declan on the other side pleading for our forgiveness. But when I opened the door, I was greeted by an unfamiliar face, a stern-looking police officer. "Mrs. Langston?" the officer asked, his voice neutral. I nodded, my heart pounding in my chest. "Yes, that's me. "What can I do for you, officer?" "I'm afraid I have some news regarding your husband, Declan," he said, his expression unreadable. Finn appeared at my side, his eyes filled with trepidation. "What happened?" The officer cleared his throat, his gaze shifting between us. "Mr. Langston has been sentenced to 5 years in prison for his crimes. The embezzlement and affair charges were substantial, and the judge deemed him a flight risk." I felt a wave of relief wash over me, quickly followed by a twinge of sadness. Declan had brought this upon himself, but the finality of his punishment was still a difficult reality to accept. "I see," I said, my voice steady. "Thank you for informing us, officer." The officer nodded, a hint of sympathy in his eyes. "If you have any questions or need assistance, please don't hesitate to contact us." With that, he turned and left, and Finn and I were left alone once more. I placed a hand on his shoulder, meeting his gaze. "It's over, Finn," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Declan's finally going to pay for what he's done." Finn nodded, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "I'm glad, Mom. I'm glad we fought back. I'm glad we didn't let him get away with it." I pulled him into a tight hug, a weight lifted from my shoulders. "Me too, Finn. Me too." In the days and weeks that followed, Finn and I continued to rebuild our lives, each day bringing new challenges and opportunities. I secured the promotion I had worked so hard for, and Finn excelled in his studies, his sights set on the future. As we sat together on the porch watching the sun dip below the horizon, I felt a sense of peace and resilience that I hadn't experienced in a long time. Declan's betrayal had shaken us, but it had also forged an unbreakable bond between Finn and me. We had weathered the storm, and now we were stronger for it. "You know, Finn," I said, my gaze fixed on the horizon, "I'm proud of you. Proud of us. We've come a long way, haven't we?" Finn reached over and squeezed my hand, his eyes shining with understanding. "Yeah, Mom, we have, and I'm glad we did it together." In that moment, I knew that our future was bright and that no matter what obstacles lay ahead, Finn and I would face them side by side, our bond stronger than ever before.